So this is the video for week 11 in this semester. And as you guys know, we are getting closer and closer to the end of the semester. And as we've been doing throughout all of our assignments this year, but particularly in this instance, I want you to view everything that we're doing as a building block toward this final move, this final example of what we're going to be doing in your assignments, this final argument paper. So last week I had you brainstorm about the problem that you want to solve and propose your general solution. So this week, what I'm going to ask you to do is do two more pre-writing type activities and readings, and then we'll start working next week on bringing your paper together through understanding how to construct an argument and in particular how to interact with sources. So I think you'll like this information this week. It should be familiar to you because it uses a lot of the same words that we've been using throughout the semester. So, and I've got them on the board over there behind me, so we'll talk about those shortly. But in general, just to give you an idea of the schedule. So you're going to have two assignments this week, a discussion board post that will be due by Thursday, and then a written assignment by Sunday. Neither of them are all that lengthy because at this stage, what I'm more interested in is watching how you bring these ideas together effectively. So, and this is what we're doing in terms of constructing a paper, is really trying to get our thoughts lined up before we jump into the writing process. If you're anything like me, sometimes free writing is really good, but often if I put it off to too long and I don't have an idea of what I'm trying to write, it can get all over the place really quickly. And that's where things become intimidating. And that's where things get more difficult than they need to be. So these are pre-writing exercises and activities to help you avoid that process. So anyway, so as we're going to move on, I'm going to slide over here to my Blackboard page. This is our class Blackboard page, and show you what we're doing this week. And I want to point to a couple of things in the readings that I want you guys to pay attention to. So it's week 11, thesis and argument. And looking at the instructional materials. Obviously, you've already been here and seen the week 11 video, but I wanted to point to this article called the Working Thesis Exercise. Now, much of what this article talks about during the front end are things that we've already done in this semester in terms of coming up with your idea and situating yourself in it, and seeing what's going on, what other people are saying about it in your analysis and evaluation assignment. So really, I want to point to a key. I mean, all of this information is pretty helpful, but I want to point to the key part for you to look at for this week, which is in this space where it is almost there. Sorry, guys, this is a lengthy article. It's a really good one, but so writing a working thesis. And I wanted to just explain to you what a thesis statement is. A lot of times instructors in my position assume that you already know the best way to construct a thesis statement. But that's just not true, not necessarily. A lot of times what you've experienced in writing environments is your teachers trying to give you a good framework that you can use to develop your thesis statement. What tends to happen though is that, and this is true, and this is not your teacher's fault necessarily, it's much more what we do with the information we have. So we will take a thesis statement and then or a thesis statement format that says, okay, if you have 3 ideas in your paper, you need to give your readers an idea of where you're going with this. And so when it typically happens is we have a 3-pronged thesis statement separated by commas, and it's the same thing over and over again, and it has to be at the end of the introductory paragraph. And I'm saying this because it probably sounds familiar to many of you, and that thesis statements have to be in this particular format. But what tends to happen, and what I see a lot of, is the format being right, but an actual thesis statement not happening. Because a thesis statement is not just how you approach the writing of the sentence, it's giving your readers an idea of your specific issue and where you're going to in your paper. And when I say give your idea of a specific issue, it's a specific point that you are taking on a topic. So let's unpack a couple of things in this article that I think are going to be particularly helpful. So the point And there's some great information here about drafting a thesis that has an argument and being willing to have a temporary thesis. But I want, excuse me, but I wanted to give you some examples, and I think this article is really helpful at explaining what tends to happen with thesis statements. And we're going to look at what those good working theses are, but here are some thesis statements that are not good, right? Computer crime is bad. Fisheries around the world are important. The Great Gatsby is an American novel, right? So one of the things to avoid in writing a thesis statements is that you take a stand that is not, you see it right here, take it a stand that is not generally considered a fact. And that's what's really tempting about this, is you can say that it sounds like you're taking this strong point, but if you're just claiming a specific thing that people already know or that most of the world agrees on, it's not an actual thesis statement, right? So imagine if I came to you today and I say, the water is wet. You'd say, yes, obviously. But that's, if I, let's say that I constructed an entire paper around the idea that water is wet, and I talked about the role of H2O, and I talked about all of these different things doing with moisture. But at the end of the day, the only thing I'm saying is something that's obvious, that's been proven in so many cases. So the first thing to keep in mind is that your thesis statement needs to state something that is not generally considered a fact, like these statements here. Computer crime is bad. Well, the term crime already indicates that it is bad. Fisheries around the world are important. Thank you. And The Great Gatsby is an American novel. By virtue of the fact that F. Scott Fitzgerald, who spent some time with his wife here in Montgomery, I don't know if you're familiar with Montgomery history at all. You can go to their house over in Cloverdale. It's interesting if you're into 1920s culture. There's plenty of stuff around Montgomery to talk about it, right? We have a road in Montgomery, Zelda, that's named after Zelda Fitzgerald. So, sorry about that. I got a little distracted by the F. Scott Fitzgerald of it all. But The Great Gatsby is an American novel. Yes, he was an American. He wrote in America. Ergo, it is an American novel. Try to avoid those obvious statements because you're not in a position to try to prove anything. These are statements of fact. And we could definitely debate some of the details, but in general, that's not something that's really arguable. And here's another idea about a thesis statement. There are many controversial ways of dealing with computer crime. There are many things that could be done to preserve fisheries around the world, and The Great Gatsby is a wonderful novel for several different reasons. They're moving in a more specific direction, but what's actually happening is they're not actually staking a claim. They're not saying this, here's this point that I want to make supported by evidence. It's again just sharing a general idea about what's going on in the world. They are vague. They're not really giving you any specific way. Like, there are many controversial ways of dealing with computer crime. That just says there are some ways. That doesn't say this information is a specific way of dealing with the crime. And I want to point to, after we've seen some of these things, right, it is that each of the good working thesis statements, one we've already talked about, that takes a stand that is generally not considered a fact, and we want to move to specific statements as to the direction the writing will take. So here's an example. While some computer hackers are harmless, most of them commit serious computer crimes that represent a serious internet security problem. Or, to borrow Great Gatsby, the Great Gatsby depiction of the connection between material goods and the American dream is still relevant today. You hear the specificity of that. You hear the argument of that. I'm going to make this statement, right? Because, and as you read it, you can see definite ways that people could argue against it. And that's always a good check of your thesis statement. Is what I'm saying provable, which means automatically that there's some way that people might disagree with me. So in this first statement, someone could say, well, computer hackers are mostly harmful. Or you could say that, well, actually, that's kind of what that thesis is statement. So let me rephrase that. You could say in that first statement, well, most computer hackers are harmless and there's only a few bad eggs. This is arguing directly against that. Or that The Great Gatsby is not about material goods in the American dream. Or you could say that Great Gatsby, which is 100 years old at this point, is no longer relevant in America. Those counterpoints there show whether or not you're actually creating a solid thesis statement. So, what I want you to think about is these two rules. One, that a thesis statement is a good thesis statement is takes a stand that is generally not considered a fact, and two, is specific enough to give the writer and potential reader some idea as to the direction the writing will take. It needs to be specific as to where you're going, and it needs to say that it make a specific claim. So, does that mean that you always have to have this hard charging argument? No. You can make academic arguments with informational thesis statements, but what you want to do is basically explain why this information is important or relevant to your audience. So the that Great Gatsby example, for example, for example, is a good thesis statement because it is saying that these topics are relevant, but they're saying it's relevant for today. They're not likely to bring up any new information about the Great Gatsby on its own in the past, but they're bringing it forward and saying this information in the past is relevant for today. So those are some guidelines that I think can be particularly helpful as you are working on your thesis statement. So in other words, and so I'm sorry, go down here go back to Blackboard. Excuse me, I got ahead of myself there. Go to the learning activities and click here this working thesis discussion board post, and you'll see here when you do this in the discussion below, draft your thesis statement. Remember that a thesis is a summary of your argument or the key idea for your readers. Remember the ideas that make up a good thesis statement from our readings, what we just talked about. A good thesis takes a stand that is not generally a fact and is specific enough to give the reader an idea of where your paper is going. So what I will do is over the course of this week and by the way, you'll notice that's due 10/6, 10/26/23, which is Thursday. I'll take a look at those and give you some feedback on how specific you're being, what information is the most helpful for you, and to say like this is a good direction, keep going, or draw it more specifically. You're getting caught in this giving general information. I want to help you stake a specific claim. So the first part of this week's work is working on your thesis statement. Now, as we move into the second part of this week, you're going to go to this finding the good argument. And like the previous article, I want to point to some specific information that I think will be helpful for you when we talk about the rhetorical appeals. Now, some of this we're going to return back to in terms of how to construct an argument. I'm sorry, I went straight past it. Let's go back up. This is the problem when you film these videos in real time, is that you often make mistakes. And as all of you who have watched these videos this semester are going, yes, I know exactly what you mean, Mr. Moody, because I've seen you make plenty of them, which I'm well aware of. And by the way, if you ever catch any mistakes that I make, if you're ever information is not clear, again, it sounds great when I say it, or it often doesn't even sound great when I say it, but that doesn't mean that it's coming across as well as you need it to for your own work. So make sure you're reaching out to me. But what I wanted to put in this into this video is to discuss wrong one. Your rhetorical appeals. So in the analysis and evaluation assignment, I really had you unpack the rhetorical situation and the rhetorical appeals and how the author used that. The whole goal of that was to get you set up to use your own or to use the rhetorical appeals yourself. So what I want you to do in the next writing assignment, and we'll go to it in just a second, is think about yourself within, I'm going to go this way. Sorry, we're backwards. All right. We're going to think about yourself in a rhetorical triangle, which, by the way, I'm not an artist, if you can't tell. That's the worst drawn triangle ever. But I think it serves our purpose well because this is a writing class, not an art class. So think about your own rhetorical situation and how you are going to approach this rhetorical situation. Sorry to use the same terms over and over again. But you are the author. Right. So explain, bring in some elements of your literacy narrative, or your narrative, just your single narrative, excuse me. Think about why it's particularly relevant, why your experience is here. who is your audience? And you'll see on the assignment sheet that I've talked about the audience being our class. What is it that you're overall saying? And in your writing assignment for this week, I'm going to have you describe your general rhetorical situation, including your rhetorical purpose, what you are trying to accomplish. And then after that, I want you to explain each one of these rhetorical appeals. Now, I wanted to look at this article really quickly because I think it's really helpful to show the rhetorical appeals using logos, ethos, and pathos. So, logos essentially is using logic as proof for an argument. Now, oftentimes that is numerical evidence or what we would consider basic logic, but it has a lot more to do with just reasoning. Does the reasoning, and we've talked about this, does the reasoning of your argument make sense? And the example they give from a car commercial is Americans love adventure. Ford Escape allows for off-road adventure. Americans should buy a Ford Escape. Or the Ford Escape offers the best financial deal. And they'll usually depict that with showing you the price ranges or showing the Ford Escape on those outdoor adventures. They are attaching to that logos that idea of this reasoning will show. So if you're looking for the best deal on a car, I'm going to show you why the Ford Escape is the best deal on a car. You will follow me. That is what logos reasoning is. If it follows to use numerical data and evidence, that's great. But mainly it's about, does this make logical sense? Can I get from point A to point B in that same way? In the same way that they describe there, oftentimes it comes across as a syllogism. And we'll talk more about syllogisms as a specific construction type. But in general, I just want you to think about the type of reasoning and the type of evidence that you are going to use to present your point. So what I don't want to see in your assignment is, here's my logos, and it says, I'm going to use these numbers. Tell me how those numbers help your logical construction, help the logical, I made up a word, logical construction of your paper as you walk through it. And again, we're just projecting here. We're getting their ideas on paper. Next week, we're going to walk through how to execute that effectively. Ethos, we've talked about before, is that idea of authority or reputation. It is tied to the idea of ethics, but basically, why should we trust you? Why is your information effective? So in many cases, I've had you guys talk about your own experiences here, and that is a way of establishing trust. But you can also show through the sources that you're using, I am credible at this because this person is a scholar in this field, or these people are relevant in this conversation. I may not have this personal experience, or I may not have a direct connection, but this scholar does, and these scholars do. So that's where proving that point is. And they give that great example of, right now in the Nissan commercials, you've got Brie Larson driving the Nissan and talking about how adventurous it is. And it's like, okay, well, if Brie Larson wants to drive this and she's Captain Marvel, then that makes this car adventurous, I guess. Now, notice, does that mean that it's necessarily the case, but because Brie Larson drives a Nissan, that the Nissans are that much better? Absolutely not. We're talking about how they construct their appeals to prove their points or to accomplish their overall goals. And then finally, in pathos, and pathos is probably the one you have the most experience with and that you know the best. And that's where you as the author are using emotions to connect there. So here's after an image of a worried mother watching her 16-year-old daughter drive away. Ford Escape takes the fear out of driving. So everybody's like, yes, that I can see how that connection is being made there with the Ford Escape. Right? This sense of parents are going to have fears. Right? My son is about to turn 16 years old. I want him to have a safe car. He does not have a Ford Escape. He's got a great, very reliable 2008 Hyundai Sonata, right? So he is not going to be setting any land speed records anytime soon because I trust the safety of that car, and in part because Hyundai has presented that opportunity for us to think about that, like he's driving a Sonata, not some of the higher end things or the things that go faster. So These are an explanation of the rhetorical appeals in this article that I linked that I think you'll find particularly helpful. Which way am I going? This way. So think about your use of ethos, pathos, and logos, and remember that it needs to be framed up as a part of the overall rhetorical situation. So we're going to go back here to the rhetorical situation and appeals, and you click on this, and I'm going to add some information here because I just realized it's not sitting there. When you click on attempt one, where I've asked you to, and really it's about a page long, double space, 300 words. But what I'd like to see you do is describe your rhetorical situation and how you're going to appeal to it. And as I mentioned before, this is all the framework for how you're going to execute the argument effectively. So if you have all this situated, it definitely gives a framework to guide you as you start implementing your things here in the next week. So use this assignment as the way of brainstorming to think about your next steps. I promise you it will flow so much easier if you put some effort into this particular assignment. So that's it for this week. If you have any questions or concerns, particularly areas where it may not have been quite as clear in the reading or in this video, please let me know, and I'll be happy to correspond with you. I've got your assignments coming back to you. And as always, please make sure you read my comments on them. They are always designed to give you room to revise, but also to direct you as you are finding more and more information. So thanks very much. Have a great week.